Great. My name is Adina Levin, and among other things, I'm the co-founder and executive director of Seamless Bay Area, which is a nonprofit focusing on in the Bay Area achieving a seamlessly integrated and rider-friendly, equitable, and accessible public transportation system, which seems super obvious, but it's less obvious when you think that in the Bay Area we have 27 different transit agencies that historically did not work as well as they should together, leading to discombobulated fares and discombobulated schedules and discombobulated signs. And as a consequence, we had a transit system that was not as user friendly as it should be and not as fast and affordable. And so this is something that people said, well, gosh, this is not possible to do. But we looked at it and said, hey, people do this around the world. Yes, we can here too. And worked on bringing about that change, which is something that like an ordinary person taking a bus to a train totally understands. And so we needed to build up a movement in order to make change. We've seen more change on this in the last 5 years and in the previous 50. Part of bringing this change about is having more funding for more frequent service. And in order to make this big change, it was very obvious to me that we need an extremely massive movement, not only here in the Bay Area, but around California, and for that matter, around the states to, elevate support for public transit. And it was, and also in doing the work on seamless transit, people, and being out and about with riders, and somebody would come and say, "Hey, I have an issue with my bus stop, and my bus stop doesn't work right," or, "I want to have my bus be faster and not get stuck in traffic." And this is a kind of thing that, like, yes, this is doable, and like, I'm not a half bad coach, but that does not scale. We needed a massive movement. We needed to scale. And as part of that, and we might get to part of the story, I ran into Carter Lavin, who is a huge, hello, Carter, huge piece of building up this very large movement and scaling that movement. And Carter, in his excellence at doing this, has written a book and will share it. So this is not only what Carter has done, but what you can do. Um, we'll stop introducing myself, hand it over to Carter, who cut his teeth working in the climate movement and bringing solar energy to California, stumbled into doing this for transit in ways that he might or might not share. And hey, Carter, so like, what got you into this and why did you write a book?
Sure. So it's great to be here with you. It's fun to do this. We've been collaborating for many years together. Fun to do this as a book talk and be in the interview chair. Um, so I've been a transit, bike, and street safety advocate for many years now, and I come to this from the climate advocacy space. When I was a teenager growing up in the Mid-Atlantic, climate change came on my radar in a really big way. And when you look at where that comes from, where the emission sources, that's transportation. And so I worked in the solar industry for 17 years or so before, and at the time I started doing a little bit of transit advocacy on the side, try to get a bus lane on the Bay Bridge. That's how we first met. And a big part of that experience I really learned in transit advocacy and bike safety and things like that in Oakland, where I live, is there's just a ton of work to do. There's a ton of work to do. There's a lot of great people like yourselves and other organizations that are doing big chunks of this work, but there is just kind of an infinite need for more people and to do this good work. And the great news is there's a lot of people out there who do want that bus lane or that bus bulb out or that speed bump or that youth pass. The tricky thing is knowing how to fight and how to win is tough. I've been through like literally over 100 campaigns of all shapes and sizes, stuff from, winning $1 billion at the state level to, getting protected getting bike racks installed in BART stations. Really big stuff, really small stuff. And it's all kind of the same when you talk about like, well, how does it fight? And so that's why I wrote, If You Want to Win, You Got to Fight, a guide to successful sorry, a guide to effective transportation advocacy, coming out from Island Press, basically to help people jump way ahead in the learning process, because you don't learn this in school, and people often learn this from experience. So even experienced advocates, they tend to know what they've learned, like what they've done, but unless you've made a really intentional study of all these different aspects, it's really easy to be someone who's won a couple of things, but maybe hasn't thought too much about like inside outside game strategy and other things that we'll talk about. And so I interviewed dozens of advocates across the country, who are bike and transit and street safety advocates. I brought their wisdom into the book, brought a lot of my own experience. And yeah, I'm excited to help more people fight the fights that they want to fight and help them win it and have an easier time doing it.
Okay, and speaking of helping people fighting the fights, those like people are y'all who are here with us in the Zoom webinar. So in order to help like tailor this discussion for who is here participating in the conversation, we have a small poll. And if you can fill out this poll, that will give a picture of who's here, and that will help kind of to tailor the rest of the conversation. And while you are filling out the poll, like Carter is so right that these things are really learnable. And I was taught by people in Austin, Texas, who are working on criminal justice reform in Texas,
Mhm.
who trained a pair of female volunteers to go up against the private prison lobby and win. Um, so that was I learned from some masters. These are learnable skills. All right, where
Yeah,
do we have the poll? We have 37 people of 48. We'll keep the poll open for another 10 seconds.
yeah.
Clay, do you want to close the poll?
Well,
Go ahead.
and that's also to your point about learnable skills, in other spaces of like kind of advocacy spaces, there's programs, there's teaching, if you're a woman running for office, there's Emerge, there's Run for Something, there's Green Corps, there's the Purgs, there's like all these networks out there to help people fight for very, fairly specific things, or help people of a certain type to fight. And that's great. And it's also something that, we just need way more of that, and we need it for the transportation advocacy space.
Mhm. Okay. So in this poll, 92, almost everybody here is a community member, and a smaller number of us are government agency staffers or professionals in the field. And in terms of a level of experience, um, a few of us are brand new, starting from the beginning, and the most of us are people who have some experience but have a ways to go in the learning journey. So that's going to be really helpful in terms of how to focus the rest of the conversation. The way that we're going to do this conversation is through stories. Like people learn through stories from when we were hominins sitting around a campfire. And so we're going to go through a couple of stories. We're going to go through a big story, a really major campaign. Carter's going to tell the story, and then we're going to see what we learn from this about like how you can do advocacy and fight and win. And then we're going to move on to a small story, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. So the big story, Carter, what happened with the transit budget fight in 2023?
Yeah, so the California transit budget fight of 2023, not to be confused with the 2025 one, which we are, I would say, right on the cusp of having officially finished. I don't know if Gavin Newsom has officially signed the $750 million loan for Bay Area transit agencies that we all fought so hard for to win. But we're pretty close to that. But way back when, 2023, a million years ago, the situation was a little bit similar to now. Obviously, the federal situation was a bit different, but Bay Area transit agencies, BART, Muni, AC Transit, VTA, all these agencies we know and we love, were struggling. They're facing what a phrase that many of us have now heard, the fiscal cliff, this concept of they don't have money, so they have to cut service, which means they don't have riders, which means they get less money, which means they have to cut service, and all that stuff till you death spiral. Not a fun type of spiral. And as part of that campaign, what we as a very big umbrella of groups throughout all of California, frankly, stepped up to push in the state budget to win what we eventually won was about over $1 billion. And depending on how you count it, we also stopped a multi-billion-dollar cut to transit funding that Governor Gavin Newsom initially proposed. So it's about a $3-ish billion swing that we got for transit. And this was a big campaign. This was, one of the world's largest economies, billions of dollars, statewide, all sorts of stuff. And kind of a couple of things that we had working to our advantage. One is very realistic timing. When you want something from somebody, in this case, the state of California, there's times to get stuff. That's the state budget process in this case, which is June, is when it all kind of comes out. So, from January to June, there was like, okay, well, we know we need to get extremely loud. We need to focus on this. And it's June, 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 budget, budget, budget. And for a lot of campaigns, big or small, a key step is just actually figuring out what are the exact mechanics of getting what you need, getting what you want. We had a Transbay Coalition member who reached out to me the other day to talk about ferry service changes. And a big thing we had to talk about, it's like, okay, well, who's changing? Who's in charge? When are these times? Like, let's chew this out. Let's chew through this. And a great part, and I talk about this in the book, particularly in chapter 3, about context, a great part, especially for newbie advocates, I get that that can sound really intimidating. The good news is there are people around you who know. And in the case of California, there's a lot of very friendly transportation advocates who say, hey, so when's the budget? And they'll say, well, there's this thing called the May revise, and in June, da da da. And like you just say thank you, and you take a ton of notes, and you learn stuff. For folks who maybe are operating in communities that have less of a kind of robust advocacy sphere, there's still people who know. It might be a staffer at one of the agencies you're trying to change. It might be someone who works for the office of a person you're trying to change. It might be a journalist. People know these things. And so being unafraid, being bold and able to say to them like, hi, I would like to get this policy changed. How do I change a policy? And ideally, the jaded reporter is going to say, well, here's how City Hall works and da da da, and they'll walk you through it in a nice, friendly way. They might do it in a very condescending way, which I've also experienced where someone's like, I can't believe you want to win a change and you don't know this, this, and that. And they're like, okay, well, now thank you for telling me about this, this, and that. So you still got the info, even if it wasn't delivered in such a great way. But anyway, back to the 2023 budget fight. So we knew what we wanted, we knew who we wanted it from, all the stuff. One of the big things is when you're asking for $1 billion, you don't get it for asking nicely. You don't get it if you only ask once. You have to ask real loud, repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. And so one of the big things we did very early on in this campaign was work to build out a robust coalition, which chapter 5 of my book talks about how to build out coalitions and what coalitions are. At the end of the day, and how to work well in coalitions. And at the end of the day, a coalition is a group of individuals or groups that get together to achieve something for a specific period of time. And so a big part, though, is we said, okay, well, who cares about transit in California? And it's like, well, that's everybody. It's like, okay, well, we have to get more specific because there isn't, you can't email info@everybody.com, or maybe you can, but that doesn't go out to everybody. So we had to start getting detailed about who is this everybody. So we did a lot of looking at communities of faith, or communities of worship, a lot of business associations, a lot of disability justice groups, youth groups, climate groups, racial justice groups, anti-incarceration groups, and I said climate groups, environmental groups, which are slightly different than climate groups, and especially here in California. And basically just kind of build out this whole like universe of folks, unions as well. And then we started reaching out to them and say, hey, here's this issue. Let me tell you about this thing that's called a fiscal cliff. It's a death spiral. It's a real bummer, but don't worry, we can save it. And, really getting all these groups on board at the same time while channeling a lot of people into doing that kind of daily work of reaching out to the governor, reaching out to their state reps to do the budget process. Yeah.
So Carter, were you the only person? There's a lot of groups in California. California's a big state.
Mhm.
Were you the only person who was reaching out to people and groups as part of this campaign?
Of course not. I was I think we called it a speakers bureau. I think there was like a dozen or so folks who got trained up to do it. And fun fact, we're going to have to do it again to talk regional measure, but that's more for later. And a big part of when you're doing this kind of large campaigning is having multiple people in multiple positions so that, for example, a car crash or a COVID infection or any of these things doesn't mean that your entire campaign collapses because that one person who is the one person is gone. And so a big part that we also did for it was kind of handing over the keys to kind of quote Becky Bond, who also wrote a great book in the space. A big thing that we did was we said, "Hey, folks, here's the PDF for a flyer. If you want to print this out and put it out in your community, go for it." And a great thing about California and transit, there's a ton of people out there who say, "Sure, I'll do that. That's great. I want to do a thing. Thank you for trusting me with the flyer." And we did it in a variety of languages so that people can get the word out to their community. And that's a big part of kind of any campaign is bringing in your volunteers, it's bringing in supporters, it's helping people like do stuff. You don't want someone to just say, "Hey, thumbs up, I saw that thing, good luck." If someone takes the petition or they scan the code and they say, "Thanks for the flyer, this is so cool," you say, "How can," and they say, "How can I help?" You say, "Great, here's a stack of flyers, like go pass them out to more people."
Yeah, and one thing that can be, a burden when you want to get something done is to feel like you got to do everything yourself. And it's really, really, really not true. People are usually eager to help. So when we had a flyer and we realized we wanted it to be available in neighborhoods where a lot of people spoke Spanish and Chinese. Like we put it out and people stepped in and translated it into Spanish and
Mhm.
Chinese. So like ask for help. That's actually a really good way of building your movement because
Mhm.
your volunteers are not just like passively sitting by, but people will sit up and take leadership. So
Yeah. And on that point, for a lot of people, especially those who are newer to this, asking for help is a terrifying concept. That idea of being vulnerable to a stranger or a friend, say, "Hey, I need your help." Which is why chapter 4 dedicates a good chunk of time talking about this because it is just such an important thing to ideally get comfortable with. And if not comfortable with, still being able to do it through that discomfort. One of the big things that I had learned that really sticks with me is people do want to help. And if you make it easy for them, if you make it impactful for them, and if you make it easy for them to understand their impact, then they will do it. If you say to a person, "Hey, I need you to pass out this flyer," and the flyer reads like gibberish to them, they're like, "This seems like a bad idea." But if the flyer is very clearly a good thing, if you train them up on it, and if they understand why that flyer matters, why them spending 2 hours not on a couch out in the field doing some stuff, that makes it a lot easier for folks to volunteer. And kind of the last thing, which for now about making it easy for people to volunteer is or getting comfortable with this. If you view it as you're doing them a favor, if internally, don't express it to them. That's kind of a negative thing. Um, but just to take a recent example, I recognize a lot of names in this chat. Uh, a lot of you have helped out at a wide variety of times. Recently, we had 5 days notice to throw together a 200-person rally in San Francisco to push for transit funding. That required asking for a lot of stuff from all sorts of people. We borrowed bullhorns, we borrowed all sorts of stuff. People wanted to do stuff. People were angry at the news. They felt like, how can I help? What can I do? I care so much about Muni and VTA and all these agencies. What do I do? And by giving them a way to put that feeling into practice, you're helping them out. And so, yes, and also recognize that people are going to say no all the time, and that's fine too.
yeah. So let me ask you another kind of leading question in here. So like a big thing about the California's budget is that is one of the more opaque and secretive pieces of government in the state. And the decisions wind up being made in this back room deal. So, like, was it Carter? Was it you who was in the backroom deal and in the back room, knowing what was going on? And if not, who was?
Yeah.
And like, can you talk about the relationship between like the people who are close to the room and the people that are on the street?
Yeah, so I would say over the last 8 years, one of my most common hobbies has been getting people to yell at Gavin Newsom. So I am not the person who gets invited into those spaces. I don't think I'm on his radar as an individual. That'd be, who knows? But the good news is I don't have to be in that spaces. And for the folks who are getting started in their advocacy, who all this stuff sounds like intimidating about mayors and governors, like that doesn't have to be you. Much like it doesn't have to be you that speaks Spanish to translate the flyer. It's as long as someone is doing that work, it doesn't have to be you. You do need to make sure you're connected with that person, or your life is easier if you are connected with that person. In which case, like Spur is a great ally of ours, and there's of all sorts of folks who have all sorts of different levels of access to elected officials. And what we're talking about is how do we coordinate the kind of pressure from like outside of the elected halls of power, pressure from the street, the people putting on the Gavin Newsom mask with a baseball bat, smashing the heck out of a Caltrain model, a cardboard Caltrain model, while blocking freeway traffic. And how do we coordinate with them and the people sitting at the table negotiating with the budget staff? And this is called inside outside game or inside outside strategy. Chapter 6 of my book is entirely dedicated to this subject because while it is a known concept, I didn't coin this phrase by any means. It is one of those things that people aren't explicitly taught a lot, and especially in the transit and the bike and the street safety world, it is generally not thought of as something in our space. It's viewed as like, oh, that is a more kind of complicated political strategy thing. And so I made a whole chapter about this. And a big part is making sure that the people who are on the inside who have the stuff are communicating clearly about like what's working, what's not, what are the arguments, who are they not hearing from? Saying, oh, we're just hearing from people in the East Bay, we're not hearing enough from the South Bay. That says, okay, for us on the, let's hit the streets in San Jose, let's go down to Palo Alto, let's go down to Gilroy, like let's go get in the field. And at the same time, it's for people on the outside to be communicating to people on the inside saying, hey, look, we have all sorts of stuff. You need to work with us. Like, do you need 12 churches? Do you need a bunch of unions? Like what kind of messages are going to help get through that? Like we can spin it up. Transit's extremely popular. Bikes and street safety are extremely popular. Give us a little direction here.
Yeah. And I want to really emphasize this because, like, this is really a superpower. If you take the inside and the outside on their own, those are common failure modes.
Yeah.
If someone is all on the inside, they're like really buddy buddy with the governor, and the governor says, well, I'm sorry, I've done what I can, and there's nothing I can do. And that person on the inside alone would say, all right, I guess we're done. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing we can do. And
Yeah.
if you're on the outside, you can say, I'm mad as hell and I want to have a demonstration. And it's Tuesday. I want to have a demonstration. I want to yell.
Yeah.
But if you want to do the demonstration and you know that that Tuesday is right before a decision is going to be made on Friday, and you know that you're having the demonstration like in the district of the person who's going to make the decision, and you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
embarrassing them in front of the hometown press, it's that combination of the inside and the outside
Mm-hmm.
together that is a
Yeah.
superpower, and the book kind of unpacks that.
Thank you. Well, and I think one thing that for transportation advocates, there's so much space on the inside, so to speak. There's so much um, just to take a small example, I mentioned in the book. Years ago, I helped get bike racks installed at MacArthur Bar inside the Fairgate area. Mainly, that just involved pestering the heck very politely and respectfully out of the bar director, who's Rebecca Saltzman, who's a wonderful pro biker. And it was not that hard. She is someone who cares about this stuff. And but inside, it's like you have access. You say, hey, this should be fixed or that should be fixed. And a lot of times, especially in the transit world, like transit folks can be some of the only people paying attention to this thing, like that we can be sort of an extra helper for staff. But we say, hey, if the bus stop were 2 blocks over this way as opposed to that, like you almost get to act like a staffer at these agencies. And so there's a lot of times people in the transit space recognize rightly that we can make a lot of a change from the inside and from the inside only. However, if the departments or elected officials say, I don't care, then you're kind of stuck. Like, for example, there's a million commissions, and you can get on that bike ped commission and say, we, as the commission on bike and pedestrian safety in our town, say this street should have a new crosswalk. If the mayor says, okay, cool, leaves you on red, like that, so what? They have that access. You get told no to your face. Having the outside pressure is what allows you to say, okay, mayor, you're up for reelection pretty soon, or you're trying to run for higher office, or hey, that you just care about your good name. We're going to start pinning this on you that our mayor says you're fine, we're fine having a dangerous street. And that getting that pressure really starts making it so that elected officials and other folks at agencies start to listen a bit more to what the inside has to say. And as you can kind of already tell, like there's inherent tensions between these different positions of inside and outside, which is why chapter 6 really focuses on how to kind of understand these roles in a much deeper way and how they can collaborate a lot better, and what are the common points of disconnect and how to bridge those gaps.
Mhm. All right. So like that was a lot. That was a big story, and then a little bit on uh actually Elizabeth asked a question. Carter, I'm going to open this up and take some questions
Sure.
about this so far. And Elizabeth asks, um, how do you and Halima, you ask a really good question up at the top. We will get to that, and this is not being forgotten. How do you make sure that the repeated pestering feels polite and respectful for the government agency representative, worrying that my pestering sometimes feels annoying and repetitive? Like, what's the
I
difference
love this question.
between persistent advocacy and stalking, Carter?
Um, so I love this question. It is such a good one. I once saw, blank on their name, Ian, who's an East Bay advocate, once said years ago that the difference between a gadfly, like some kind of annoying pester, and an organizer is an email list. And there's a couple other differences, but I feel like that's a pretty good one. And it was like really stuck with me. But there's a few things to this point of like, how do I know when I'm becoming annoying in a negative way as opposed to annoying in a positive way? Um, there's three main things. One is changing up how you're doing it, changing up what you're doing, and changing up who's doing. So, for example, what you're doing. So, if you are now just sending the same email over and over and over to the same person, you're like, look, this email, this is now repetitive. I, I'm copying and pasting, and they're ignoring it. You've checked that box. You're like, I sent the email, I sent the follow up. Maybe I sent a follow up of a follow up just in case. That email box is checked. Um, and it's an important step to do that. It is important to like hit that box, make sure that someone can't say, well, you never asked politely. It's like, no, okay, I asked politely. The next part, I think, is getting a lot more people to join in with you. I think as the easiest form of escalation is what we typically refer to this as, is getting more people to say it with you. So I sent an email, just as an example, the other day. I sent an email to another BART director, Victor Flores, about actually 19th Street bike parking in the Fairgate area. I sent him a polite email. He sent me a polite thing back. He said he'll scan on it. And like a nice escalation would be following up with him in 2 weeks, saying, "Hey, I was just back there checking in." Eventually saying, "Here's now 5 people also sending that same email." Then it becomes not about you. It then doesn't say, "Hey, I should ignore Elizabeth." Like the question is, what's the problem? I think about the pestering thing. If the problem is Adina continues to pester me, then the solution is ignore Adina. If the problem is transit in the Bay Area is, like incoherent, and Adina and 1,000 other people continue to tell me this across a bunch of different meetings, then it's not about Adina. Then it's about what's happening. Um, and so to that kind of great question of like, when is the pestering too much? Like, yeah, if you've made 1 or 2 calls, you can stop making calls to that person. Now start making calls to friends and other people to get them to make that call. Uh, Another key part about that is eventually you do get some form of feedback from them. That feedback might be continued silence, but kind of updating your message to reflect it. So maybe they said, well, I can't do it now, but I'll do it in Q2. And then in Q2, you come back and you say, okay, you still haven't done it. Now this is the second quarter in a row that you've done it. It's like, kind of continuing the story. If you think of it as storytelling, you know, turn the page, have the next chapter, have it bring back that past and with you. And there's a bunch more things on that, which chapter 7 of the book talks specifically about tactics and escalation and these types of things. So I think you'll get a lot out of that because that is a tricky one. And I think for folks who are newer to advocacy or newer to scaling up their advocacy, this can be hard, especially if you are someone who is used to being a friendly face or used to having good access, that eventually you're the jerk, you know, and you don't want to feel like that. And so it's really good to kind of think through this question. I'm really glad you asked it, which actually, yeah, it connects to one of the other campaigns we want to talk about of this person, Megan Ramey, who's a very successful bike advocate in Hood River, Oregon, who she, you know, she said, and I talked about in my book, like she started as that crazy bike lady, like her words, in her town. She's like, I was the only one doing it, and you know, people just thought it was a bit weird. And a big thing that she started doing was safe routes to school, doing bike brigades, you know, getting other kids on bike, getting kids on bikes and going with her. Um, and eventually a school principal got involved. And then it's not about her, it's about everyone. It's about the community. It's showing that what she wants is shared by other people.
Mhm. Okay, so now what did you, let's kind of unpack that story a little bit.
Sure.
So like what are some of the elements that made that a successful campaign? What can we learn out of what she did?
Yeah. So one of my favorite types of ways to approach this kind of question of like, I'm in the town and I'm a weirdo and I'm, you know, no one's listening to me and whatever, is embrace that fact. To say, okay, maybe I am the weirdo who thinks every bus stop should have benches. Okay, they think I'm weird. Who do they not think is weird? They're like, oh, I bet they think the local principal, or the local head of the church, or the local small business. People might think I'm a weirdo. They like that person. I want to go talk to that person and say, hey, can I get you on board? And you know, we talk about like legitimacy or reputation. You know, these are things that are built that, you know, what defines weird or not weird is frankly a question about popularity. And so if you say, well, yes, I want this, and here's a dozen other people who want it, then it doesn't matter that you want it. What matters is a dozen other people want it. And so one thing that Megan Ramey did a great job with is kind of living the example and living it very visibly and getting other people involved. It's not the story was she went on a bike ride and she just made sure to bike every day with bigger and bigger signs that, you know, then people say, okay, Megan wants this, good for Megan. You know, she got more people to join her, kids and the school principal and all these different folks. And then with that attention, she was able to point it at places where people could do stuff. So she started winning grants for safe routes to schools, like infrastructure changes that make this easier because it's, you know, it's one thing to do a stunt or something once, and those are great things to do to like get attention. But the question is, what are you going to do with that attention? And pointing it to something that starts getting you some more systemic wins is great. So, you know, whether you're saying, hey, my elevator at this Caltrain station is broken, and you could do a big stunt, and you should do a big stunt, you know, where the elevator is broken and it's a person with a mobility need, or everyone has mobility needs, but a person with a mobility device who isn't able to use the elevator, and you like get some news about it. It's like, okay, well, do stuff with that attention. Yeah.
Oh, no, that was a mistake,
Oh,
an accident.
oh no, it's
But at any rate, is there anything else that you wanted to unpack out of that story? Sorry.
it's a million things, and this is why I wrote a whole book because you know I think that a great thing about advocacy is we are seeing it happen all the time. There's so much to learn from every single campaign. You know, I interviewed I think nearly 30 people, um, groups across the country, red states, blue states, small towns, things like that. And I didn't want to stop interviewing them, but eventually I had to start writing the book. And you know, there's so much to unpack with all these different things. And I think one thing for folks who are learning or getting started, or just looking to ramp up, is paying attention to the advocacy all around you and just always asking yourself, like, okay, what are they doing that's working? What's not working for them? You know, what information am I missing here?
Okay. So the story that you told about the mom who helps make it more safe to for her kid to get the school. There's a few clues out of that story that maybe this person was like as people who are not driving
Hmm.
is mainstream and not driving is less mainstream, but she also started out with a relationship with the principal. And it sounded like when she started looking at what to do, she found a pretty easy way to get grants. And not necessarily everyone who's starting out in advocacy is starting out with those same level of legs up. Do you have any other stories from community members and advocates who are starting in a little bit of a different place and
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite examples is I did a session with a person in because I do training sessions with people across the country. And I had a session with a person in upstate New York, in a small town of upstate New York. And by which I mean, Rochester is the massive city many miles away. This person's in a small town. And they were saying, I'm the only one who cares about this stuff. And we talked through it and it's like, okay, well, make a petition. Go talk to neighbors, like talk to strangers, even if it's a little uncomfortable. A nice thing about transportation advocacy is you can often literally point to the thing that you're talking about. You could say to a stranger, it's like, hey, you see how that car just zipped by at 70 miles an hour in a residential street? Here's this petition saying to the mayor that we should fix that. How's it going? And just talking to people and seeing what happens, because while it's nice to get started with a group that you already have and all these connections and da da da, you don't need a permit to be an advocate. You can just get started. And one of the best ways to get started is by being a bit sloppy, is being, making some mistakes. And especially if you're just starting out with like some pretty generic, like, I would like the bus to be more on time, you know, something kind of very general, you are going to start getting a lot of people's attention when you talk to them, the other bus riders. And they might say, yeah, I want it on time, but what I really want is this thing. You're like, cool. It sounds like you have a lot of desire around transit in your community. Let's talk. Like, how can I help you? And coming to that perspective of like, you're here to help is a great way of making it that it doesn't matter who you are, if you're new in town, any of that stuff, that you're making these connections, which collectively build power.
Okay, and that's a really good segue to one of Halima's questions, who says, how, and I would add why, do you engage people outside the transit sector to be part of transit advocacy, thinking of public health and racial justice,
Mhm.
public safety that intersect with transit?
Yeah. So there's what to the answer to the why, there's two ways. One is like the nice kumbaya way, which is you do it because they're part of it. This has to do with them. So of course you should talk to people about the stuff that issues deals with them. And then from another perspective, one good reason to talk to folks in the labor space or the healthcare space is they're a lot bigger and stronger and more organized and far, frankly, more popular than you are. So talk to them because you need their strength. You want to be working with them. Like, it is both the morally right thing to do and will teach you so much. And you're going to have a much easier time if you say, hey, the nurses union is on board or this kind of stuff. And I think a big part for the how to do it, I come to the space with the assumption of everything's transportation. Even if you never leave your house, things get to you. They are transporting. Like, literally, transportation is just moving through space and time. Or I guess technically moving through space. It takes time to do it. And so the good thing is like, oh wow, that's everybody. Like, yeah, that the first church of scientists has an opinion about transportation in their community. So does the second church, things like that. And kind of working your way, talking to these folks is a big thing. It's important to do it. And chapter 3 of my book focuses on how to do it, like, very specifically, because that is an overwhelming concept that a lot of people might have an opinion on this stuff and that you should be engaging with them. And a key part of this is talking to people on their values, connect with them on the thing that they care about, and centering them and their story as you talk to them. And then coming with, I would say, a fair amount of humility, and also understanding of what your expertise is, which we'll talk about that in a second. Um, but a big part, like talking to people about their values, like it is perfectly fine to say, maybe you want that protected bike lane on that street because you personally bike there to go to the bar, to go party it up. And on that street, there is a barbecue joint and you don't eat barbecue. You could still go to them and say, hey, this is going to help you with customers. Let's talk about that kind of stuff. Maybe you've never gone there before. That's still fine. Talk to them about what they care about. And similarly, they're going to have opinions. It's an actual conversation. Like they're people too. And so they might say, yeah, I don't care about the bike lane. What I really need is, better parking access, or the parking lot over there is too dark and it doesn't count because no one wants to walk there at night. And in the book, I have this anecdote from Deb Banks, who's a bike advocate in Sacramento. And she talks about how she often works with community groups who say, yeah, bikes aren't my issue. I have other, like that street light's been out for 3 years. And Deb says, okay, well, how can I help you with that street light? Like, I'm not a street light person, but I can connect you because I, know folks and let me help you. And by helping folks with their other issues, that helps them see that you're actually, you aren't there just to get a logo on a letter to say, hey, they support it. You're actually in it. So to this kind of how, a big part is actually kind of be about that work, like actually do the work. This isn't to say you have to become a caseworker or anything like that, but it's just saying like, if you are showing up and you're saying, hi, um, for this temple, I'd like you to sign on to this petition because I care about people getting to the temple. And they say, okay, well, do you care about this other thing about us? Like showing them that you're not just there for 1 second, but you're there for kind of a larger thing is going to help get the conversation going. And this gets to the part where chapter three, and this happens in coalitions a lot too, um, of kind of understanding where your expertise is and where their expertise is. That people know their life a lot better than you'll ever know their life. They also know their issue better than you'll know their issue. And so when someone says that parking lot across the street doesn't count for my community because it's dark at night, or you can't say, well, you're wrong. People can walk across the street. That's that's just not going to work. But if you say, okay, I hear what they're saying is that they're discounting a 200 spot parking lot near them, and that's why they need to maintain the street parking right by their house. Like, how do we help them get the lights on in that parking lot? How do we talk to them about that? Like being firm in your convictions while also recognizing that their truth is very real as well. And that does mean more work. That does mean getting to more complicated answers. So, fundamentally is about being grounded in respect for other people and respect for yourself.
Okay. So that was really, really very rich in starting with a couple of stories and really unpacking, things to do, things to refrain from doing in order to help bring about change in your world and to bring about change for your allies too that you want to walk alongside. Want to go from here to discussion and Q&A. And we're going to do this in, there's a couple of different pieces to this. So you may have some questions about things that Carter has already talked about. And if so, please, put them in the Q&A. But also, you came here, and like many of the people, even from the poll, said, I am starting or intermediate or expert, and there's some change I want to bring about in the world. I have some motivation, so I want to put up on the screen some questions for you to reflect on about the change that you're trying to bring about in the world. And you can take a look and think about this for just a couple of quick minutes, and then you can use that for some Q&A and coaching and little lightweight therapy as well. Hang on, let me share the screen. So this is a very abbreviated form of a advocacy training worksheet. There is a longer version of this that I'm gonna also paste this in the chat if you want to look at this at your own computer and take some notes for yourself. So we will think about this think about your own issue and potential campaign, reflect on this, and in just a few minutes, you can ask questions about what you are looking to do as well with these questions as prompts. Um,
Yeah.
while you might be looking at this training worksheet on your computer or my screen share, let's see what other questions people have asked that we can take. Um, Halima also asks, how do you bring people up to speed who are brand new to organizing? Someone who's in the community, have never done this before, and what do you do to help bring somebody along, Carter?
Yeah. I love that question. And I think a big part to this is everyone has experience with organizing. They might not know it, they might not classify it as such, but people all have experience and tend to have very strong opinions about organizing and politics and how it all. And so one step is helping people understand that and um, connecting that to their experience and helping them, say, hey, so what do you know about the mayor or that stuff? And they're like, oh yeah, well, they only like the big money people. It's like, yeah, that's why we're trying to get a ton of other people to step up, like helping them piece together the puzzle pieces they have with the story you're trying to tell. And this happened, and I think a big part of that also when you're talking to new folks is having that full story, is being comfortable saying, okay, so the big picture is we don't have transit funding in the state of California because we have highway, we have all this highway funding. There's not this transit operations thing. That's why we're trying to get this bill passed. That's why we need to get these people to reach out to that elected official. Like by having the full, why every ingredient fits into the recipe in your head, that makes it a lot easier to get people up to speed. And at the same time, recognizing that people, not everyone needs that. A lot of people, like, especially in the world of transportation advocacy, bikes and street safety and transit, there's been plenty of times where, I'm passing out a flyer like this. This is a Safe Grand Avenue flyer from an effort in Oakland. And, I was like, here's the 7 different reasons why this matters. People say, hey, you had me, Grand Avenue's a murder road. I would like it to be safer. Yeah, sure, I'll sign a thing. I'm familiar with petitions. We're like, cool. I have talking points. They're like, yeah, just give me the stack of flyers. I'll pass them out at work. We're like, great. And recognizing that, and this is something as someone who likes to talk and likes to explain and wrote a whole book about explaining things, I like it so much, that I had to do is people have different levels of interest and stuff, and that's totally fine. And so when someone's looking to get something changed, kind of taking them from the puzzle pieces that they have to a complete picture that is complete enough for them to take action. And a big part about this is centering the concept of action. At least I find that very helpful as someone who does a lot. That at the end of the day, it's not a discussion club. It's not about let's talk about it for the sake of talking about it. We're talking about it for the sake of doing stuff because it doesn't matter what I say to a friend or what I say to a room if what we're doing doesn't leave that room, if that doesn't influence the politicians, if it doesn't influence the decision makers, if we're not putting those words and deeds into the right spot, nothing changes. Then we're just posting into the void. And so by grounding this in action, that kind of inherently forces you to say, yes, this is why we are going to that rally. Yes, this is why we are chaining ourselves to that building. Yes, this is why we are making this gigantic Hollywood sign prop to hang outside Diridon Station because this is part of how we get the high-speed rail. There's by focusing on action that also prevents the like endless people could talk about politics forever and have been, kind of since the dawn of talking about how people interact with each other. And that's all well and good, but you need people to take action. And so there's a certain point where eventually you can have this conversation to a level where you realize like, oh, this person's not going to do anything. Like they're just in it for the talking. You're like, hey, that's great. I have to go pass out the next 1,000 flyers. So I'm going to go have fun with that. Lovely talking with you. And so, when it comes back to this question of like, how do you get people up to speed? It's recognizing that they don't need to get up to the full speed, just getting up to the speed that they want to get up to, and recognizing that they're coming with a whole bunch of ingredients already. So help them put those puzzle pieces together.
Okay. Um, um, Thanks. That was really a good perspective on helping somebody move along the path toward getting up to speed. So for folks who have been taking a look at the advocacy training worksheet and the questions, and you're thinking about a thing that you might want to do in the world, are there any questions that you have either that come to you about something that you want to do and that you want to ask, or about some of the stories that Carter has already shared that you have some follow-up questions about? Let's see.
Ooh, this is a good one from Elizabeth about long-term planning. Which
Yeah,
so I'm gonna take this one because it's a
go ahead.
juicy one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the short version of the question is there's immediate needs and there's long-term planning. That at the end of the day, like how do you as an advocate balance those things? You're like, okay, well, there's a plan Bay Area 2050 thing or 2075 and what have you. And there's, I would say, three big parts of this of how do you balance the immediate need and the long-term stuff. One is when you are well organized, you can do multiple things at once. You can do multiple campaigns at once, and they are often self-nourishing. So you should do multiple campaigns at once, which I know that can sound intimidating. The book, particularly chapters 2 through 4, talk about how to do that in a way that really helps because long-term campaigns get a little tiring, and you need that fresh energy. Short-term campaigns help kind of keep that attention up. Um, so one, do multiple things. Two, having a big team, growing out your crew means that, once again, you don't have to be the one who does it. You just have to make sure that that work gets done. And so, for example, Transbay Coalition, this Bay Area group that I helped lead, there's a ton of people in the group. There's over 10,000 people on the email list, a ton of people in the Slack. And there are folks who are like, hey, I'm going to check out this board meeting and that thing. You're like, great, you go do that. That's necessary. And so having more kind of players on the field helps make sure that more parts are getting done. And at the same time, like kind of listening to them. So when they do say, hey, on the 2055 plan, there's this important meeting coming up and we need to weigh in. You're like, great. We have all those people who are fired up because of the immediate campaign we've been working on. Now let's shove them into this campaign for a second or direct them into this campaign. Like, let's do it. And then the third part about that is working in coalition helps because much like kind of the inside allies, the other folks, there are some people in your community who do love to think about 2060 or 2070 or the longer term things, the Link 21s of the world. Like, great. Say, hey, folks, I'm not going to go to that meeting. I'm not going to pay any attention. But when you need me to mobilize a bunch of people, let me know what that thing is, and I will mobilize a bunch of people. And by kind of knowing, by having multiple people wearing multiple hats and being very clear with them how you are able to help is allows you to do so much more while you yourself having less on your plate. And that's something that Adina and I think recognize some names in this chat. Like I'm very upfront with my allies when I say, hey, look, I'm not going to follow this issue. I need you to send me the fully drafted email. I'll punch it up and I'll send it out. I'm not going to go to a committee meeting. So like keep me posted. And the good news is you don't have to do everything. You just need to make sure people are doing it. So building out a team and getting involved because there's other groups out there already. So finding them and making friends.
Mhm. And I would chime in and add to that where there's a sweet spot where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Mhm.
And so if you are working with a group of people, like there is not infinite time and infinite energy, and like some group of people can do more than one thing, but probably can't do everything. And so, there might be some um, you know, uh, exercise that you go through with your allies and colleagues and say, like what's the set of things that we want to focus on and how are they complementary with each other so that, we make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And this is
Yeah.
more of an art than a science.
Yeah. Well, and that's also and recognizing that there's an even more immediate near term of like kind of the direct action and figuring out where you personally like to be in that, and where your skills are. So, for example, in the Bay Area, there's a lovely crew of people who've been building benches for bus stops. They've done over 100 of them, and it's a very immediate need that people are suffering today because there aren't benches. And so this crew has been doing great work. At the same time, Transbay Coalition, our group, like we're a lot more comfortable with the slightly slower pace of getting policies changed, like getting that practice fully legalized. And so, we've been working with the city of Richmond particularly to get this process done. And it is, been an 8-month process so far. And over the course of which the benchers, I think, have done like 80 benches. And so, kind of recognizing that you can move, like different partners can move at different speeds and that different personalities are going to be suited toward different tasks. So do the stuff that you like to do, find people to do the stuff that you don't like to do.
Mhm. Speaking of people doing different things and bus wins, I want to speak out what Elizabeth shared while this was going on about a little bus advocacy victory today,
Mhm.
where there's a bus stop right around the corner from a park that has skateboarding and bike and hockey and dogs, and there's a pole-only bus stop at a busy crosswalk hidden by shrubs. And so Elizabeth reports that she's been bumped into by a kid on a scooter, a teen on a skateboard, and a pair of poodles. And today the shrubs were pruned to improve visibility. And Elizabeth's request for the stop to be moved further from the crosswalk with a covered bench has been added to the town transit planning list. So
Congrats,
really,
Elizabeth.
kudos for speaking up and getting some immediate improvements and some longer term improvements good. That is um, really, really fantastic. And for folks in the Bay Area in California, this is there's a real system problem where when the Americans with Disability Act was passed, like agencies and cities needed to make plans to make
Mhm.
everything accessible for people with disabilities and seniors. And those plans, a lot of them date to the 1990s.
Yeah,
Um, and so there's the like immediate get the thing fixed, there's get the thing into your plan, and then there's the kind of medium term, like let's make sure that these cities are forced in order to get
yeah,
funding, that they need to update their
yeah.
plan. And this
Well,
is an example of layering on immediate and medium term and long term.
and as part of all that, that we see governments don't follow their own plans all the time. And so, or their plan has the exception. There's a great example in the book. Steve Grammer, as a disabled activist in Roanoke, he speaks with an interpreter. He uses a power chair, a mobility chair to get around. And his bus stop is grandfathered in on the Affordable American Disability Act. So like it is not going to get fixed until he makes the city say, cool, new plan, we're going to fix this. And a big thing that he does is he brings elected officials just with him for the day. And when they refuse to come along, he kind of points out, it's like, you wouldn't even go, not you wouldn't last 5 minutes in my shoes, like, but you wouldn't even come along with me. And so, by really helping people see the flaws in the plan or the gaps in the plan or the importance of following through on the actual plan, that takes that kind of immediate anger and that fire along term with the kind of longer term effort. So it just needs everything. But the good news is there's all sorts of folks and it's like a relay race. It's not a huge sprint. The sprint and marathon relay, it's a lot of cardio, which is also why the conclusion of the book talks about burnout and kind of planning for the long term and how to avoid burnout and things like that. So it really takes people from very beginning through their what they need to do to be doing this forever.
Mhm. And speaking of that, Dennis has a question that I think Carter and I will have partial answers, and will also be interested in learning from wisdom from other folks on this call. Dennis asked, for those who are doing this work as a volunteer, do you have advice on how to turn the advocacy organizing into full-time work? Is there a well-trodden path for that? And I do not think that there is a simple answer to this. There's a variety of answers. There are sources of grant funding. There's organizations that have been very successful in doing a membership model where very large numbers of people, give small amounts of money for being part of a very large and powerful organization. Um, and this is something that we at Seamless and Transbay and our allies have like this is a work in progress because we have brought in funding to do some of the work that we are doing and also is a work in progress to make this more sustainable even for what we are doing. So,
Yeah.
Carter, do you have anything to chime in on that?
Yeah. So I think you handle that great. I would also say, there's, for the people who are doing this as volunteer stuff, like I think there's a certain level of embracing it as volunteer things, like embracing it as something that you do on the side as um, hobby as kind of a dilettante definition. But like if it's something you do a couple hours a day or a couple hours a week, like that's great. And it, a good way, as they say, to ruin something you enjoy is to make your career out of it. And so for the folks who are kind of at the like, I'm clocking a bunch of hours, do I want to try to go full time or not? Like one thing is saying maybe don't, like that it is a powerful thing for this not to be your livelihood to say, look, I don't have donors I need to make happy. And this is something that um, I think a big part of Transbay Coalition's initial stuff when like, we were getting Caltrans, the state highway lobby, mad at us, and all these other folks are like, hey, look at these upstarts who want their bus lane. They're like, and what are they going to do? We don't have funding for them to pull. We don't have donors for them to try to get to pull away. Like it is a powerful thing to be financially self-sufficient because you have some whatever job. I think also though, if you're like, okay, you do want to do this full time, and one thing I think about is if if you look at kind of the big associations of like, okay, well, what's America Walks, the Bigfoot, the big shadowy walking lobby. And you say, okay, well, they have like half a dozen people on staff and they are a nationwide effort and kind of recognizing what is the right amount of stuff because there is an infinite amount of work that needs to be done. It's not necessarily the same thing as work that has a financial value that a donor is going to put into. Um, and then there's a million things to talk about in terms of like chasing donors and how that can create negative results to your advocacy, things like that. So it's a complicated question. Dennis will talk more about your great work in Vancouver when I'm talking to your crew. I think it's in February.
All right. And let's see. Does anybody have any additional questions? It is 7:40 and we can take a few more questions if people have them. And then we will also be asking I see a couple more questions that we can take. And then we will all make sure. So Carter, while getting to some of the remaining questions, and people might be thinking about more, how can somebody get a hold of this book and learn about this, really useful information about how to do this advocacy and how to get better at it?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And Cynthia asked a similar question of logistics. So on the islandpress.org website. I put the link in the chat. It's also just islandpress.org/fight. You can go to the page to buy a copy of the book. Um, and if you are doing the add to cart under paperback, you can add in the discount code of webinar to get 30% off. So it's about $22. You can also reach out to your local library and say, hey, I'd like you to pick up a copy of this book so that they have it on shelf. The main drawback then is it is frowned upon if you write in it, if it's for the public library, and good to ask them to take a copy of the book.
Okay. And a couple more questions, starting with Carol.
Mhm,
And we have this time booked for 90 minutes. We don't have to use all 90 minutes, but we'll keep taking some questions, and we can
mhm.
head on back off into the evening if we're done with questions. But we can keep taking questions for a little bit if people have them. Carol asks, I've been around long enough that young activists will express scorn for circumstances that we had to work with very hard to accomplish 15 years ago. Do I let it slide, or do I tell them the history? Carter, what do you think?
So that's a great question. I think about this a lot as someone who I think has now just clocked enough years that I'm now on the other side of that equation. So I think maybe 3 years ago, I was coming in with a little bit more, um, it's like if you walk into a messed up apartment and you say, man, I have to clean up this. This is so messy. Uh, and now I think I have a deeper appreciation for it. Um, so let to the question of like, do I let it slide or not? Like I mean, that's a really deep question about like, is this worth your time? And a big part about when someone's coming with hostility and you're figuring out whether it's worth your time is recognizing that, as you're hitting at, like you can spend a ton of time and energy into like trying to win a person over. And they could be like, nah, I'm still on team jerk. I still don't care about you. I'm mad. I'm using my displaced anger at the state of the world and making that your problem. Um, and so I personally have a couple of like quick, kind of quippy things that are ways of both answering the question honestly, a little bit of shutting it down if someone's like just needs to be shut down. But the other part is it for the right person it does open it up. So one of my favorite ones I say is I'm also mad I don't have a magic wand. Um, like there's a lot of time where people are like, I'm angry and you're the one I'm talking to, therefore I'm angry with you. And by allowing yourself to express your anger in a bigger way, not at them, but saying like, yes, this is really frustrating. It is so frustrating that we have to fight every year for state funding for transit and that Gavin Newsom continues to attack transit and then we have to do all this stuff. That's frustrating. I know I was there in 2025, 2023, and I know people did it way before me. Like kind of by telling the bigger story where people see that they are in it. That's a like where they fit into that is a big one. I think also if you are talking about like a larger, like as you're talking about like generationally, as I guess a millennial, so no longer the youngest of the whippersnappers. Honestly, one of the things that was extremely like just a big moment for me was looking at the Ronald Reagan reelection electoral victory map, and it is a political map for those of you who are not who didn't live it in real time or like me who only know about it after the fact. Uh, he won every state except one, and the amount, yes, like the regardless of what you think politically about any of these people, just the concept of how politically unified our country was electorally on that election in one direction. And that direction wasn't, hey, let's have bike lanes everywhere. Like that to a certain level kind of can break a brain. Like if like whatever you think about Trump, like he he won a tiny, tiny thing compared to the Reagan thing. But like if there was a Trump victory map that looked like Reagan thing, we'd be in a very different world. And like I know what that would mean for me. And I think helping younger folks who are newer to the space recognizing the sheer amount of distance that we've had to travel at the same time helping them recognize that there are active forces at play um yeah that there are active forces at play that make this hard. Like one thing I think about a lot is how uh, easy this would all be if there was no opposition. Like if it was just the concept of, oh, we have to get 100,000 signatures and all these things and like a video game and all of a sudden unlocks the victory. Like, oh, we could do that. The issue is there's a lot of other things happening at the same time. Um, and so, to the people who are mad at, the folks who've been around the block, helping them understand these forces at play. And with a little bit, also the part that's maybe less enjoyable, and recognizing that the wisdom that an experienced advocate has is like on how change is made and how change isn't made, and like what's up against, and here are these forces, but saying like, yeah, I wasn't able to solve this problem. Here's all these things I did, and here's the part that didn't do that. So what do you got? And I'm consider myself extremely lucky to be organizing with Gen Z and even younger advocates, like like Ren and Harry Neal and so many people, Lee Yoshi, who have so many skills that I don't have, who have so much experience and so many like people are live in a different world, and being able to say, when I was a teenager, um the BART speed runs was not a thing, and that was not a world that was not on anyone's radar. That wasn't going to be a thing. Now we're in a world where BART speed runs are a thing that all the kids are doing these days, and it's making news and all this stuff. And so a big part when working with coalition partners of any type or allies of any type is recognizing that they know stuff that you don't, that I don't, and saying to them like, hey, I don't get it. Like I reached out to one of our teen organizers recently saying like, hey, so I don't understand this BART speedrun thing. So glad you're doing this stuff. This is like great that you're doing this. Would you be able to get your parents who are voters to join you on a transit trip? Like, is that a thing? And they're like, no, that's not how this works. Okay, cool. And so a part of it is recognizing the parts of the puzzle that you have while talking to people about the puzzle pieces that they might have, and like guessing at that. So that's a very long answer to a very important question. So to kind of recap, one, kind of reminding them that you're also not all powerful, that you are also mad at the lack of progress, helping them recognize the huge amount of distance that we have traveled, the fact that there are opposing forces. Like the first ever bike lane that went up in the country was in Davis, 50 years ago. That was removed. Like there was a backlash to that. And it's like, yeah, that's part of why we're here. And that's why we need to build systems and build actual like enduring power. And that's why we need to organize like that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna chime in a little bit and then segue to the next question, which is a different aspect of dealing with opposition or indifference. But
Mm-hmm.
like first, I'm going to chime in a little bit
Okay.
because in my experience, actually explicitly getting into history can be really powerful. And I'll give an example that is um, you know, more about housing than about transportation. I live in a city that is historically extremely segregated and has had a reputation for being very anti-affordable housing. And I started talking with somebody that lives in my city about like why are things stuck the way that they are, and is this just something in the water? Is our town full of evil people and there's nothing we can do about it? And we thought, well, it could be, but if we haven't tried, then we haven't tried. And one of the things that we did was there was a book called The Color of Law that looks at the history of housing segregation in the United States and how it impacted, in particular, like in the Bay Area, including in our community. And we customized it and had some workshops on that history, including extremely local history informed by people who lived through bunches of that history. And we built up a network of over 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last 2 years, we have had supporters outnumber opponents in housing decisions consistently for years. So that feeling of like you've been through the history and somebody doesn't know it, a lot of people don't know it. Might be young people, might be older people. And so sometimes it can be a strategy of actually having history as part of the education.
And
Um,
a big part also to that is recognizing that history belongs to or is defined by like the loud people. And so, as I say in my book in the kind of intro, that like at the end of the day, this is all about power. And it's like, okay, so why don't we have the high speed rail, whatever? It's like because we didn't build enough power to fight for and win. It's like, okay, so how do we build that power? Like, I I personally only care about when people say, well, why is the high speed rail not here now? And it's like there's a bunch of answers. Some of those answers help us move ahead to like how do we get it built sooner, And some of those answers are like, well, I'm mad at this guy who doesn't work at this agency anymore, who retired 10 years ago. It's like, okay, so great. We're just mad with trivia. What are we going to do about that? And I think kind of recognizing that we're in the business of doing, I think really can help from that too.
All right. And so Carter, there's the last question in the chat is from someone who has some really understandably frustrating multidimensional experiences with people that are some combination of opposed or for like really darn good reasons too busy or for maybe less good reasons kind of indifferent. And that sounds fairly complicated. I think Carter, you were offering like maybe not do you want to try to take any of that question?
I'll, yeah, I'll
Like,
take
you
some of
want to
that. And
take it
also, sure.
and a little bit more offline. What
Yeah,
what would you do when you're faced with what seems like a really cruel and uncaring world with people who have very different reasons for being cruel and uncaring, but it seems all cruel and uncaring? What do you do?
yeah. Imagine a cruel and uncaring world. That would suck. And so one, before getting into this, I do one-on-one and small group sessions. My website, carterlavin.com, is there. And so if if you read the book, or if you're like, cool, I would like to talk through this more than just read a book, like I'm here to help. Um, People do care about something. They might care. What they care about is themselves. What they care about is their issues. It's the illusion of separation. And a big thing in the world of advocacy is helping people recognize that the thing that they care about is the thing that you care about. And a big part of that is how do you make it easy for them to take action? So as I talked about in the book, like generally speaking, Friday night is not a great time for flyering. That like when people are going out clubbing, they're also not like, and let me engage in civics. Um, and at in downtown Oakland on a first Friday or something like that, I parked myself or stationed myself at an extremely dangerous corner, wearing a big yellow vest, a big like, "Hi, I'm Mr. Safety Dork here," and I had my flyers, and like people would cross the street, and they are not thinking about this stuff at all. They're thinking about their good time that they're going to have. They almost got hit by a car because the car drivers are not thinking about this stuff at all. And at that split second, when the pedestrians safely get to my side of the street, you had to talk to them and say, "Oh my God, that was terrible. We like connected." And they're like, "Yeah, that's fucking awful. Someone should do something." I was like, "Actually, here's this petition. And if you just add your name right now, that I can take care of this. You go out and party. I'm going to be here. This is what I'm doing." And the person's like, "Oh, thanks for doing that." This is something that we have a huge advantage of in a as a huge advantage of as like issue-based organizers, which is we are people who are organizing on a topic. Kind of the other end of that spectrum is community organizers, who are people who say like these folks in this circle, whatever you define it, maybe it's people in a certain neighborhood or of a certain demographic or age group or whatever. Like I'm trying to get them involved. But when you're an issue organizer, if you're like, oh, I'm trying to get someone who is going out, like, oh, this is a really hostile question. Like, one, you're not going to be able to get people working with you if you come at them with such disrespect. But obviously, I feel like this is a safe space. With the assumption you're not saying that to them. But like, when you are talking to them, they're like, oh, hey, they're super busy. Hey, all you need to do is add your thing here. And they'll say no. And guess what? 99% people say no. Most people don't vote. We still have elections. And at the end of the day, you don't need everyone on your side. You need enough people to get the politicians to care. And additionally, a big part that is, I think, sometimes an overlooked advantage to us is, especially when you're organizing in like hostile or less politically engaged communities, the you don't need to do much to get noticed. So, for example, if you're trying to get on Mayor Lurie of San Francisco's radar, and you're like, I have a petition, 500 people signed it. Mayor Lurie probably could not care less about a 500-person petition. To get on his radar in San Francisco, you need to add a couple of zeros to that number. However, if you're like, I'm in Orinda and I got 500 people in Orinda to sign this petition, or I'm in Brentwood and I got 500 people to sign this petition, that's a very notable number in that community. In to take Sonoma County as an example, because Transbay Coalition has been helping spin up a local group there. And for the week without driving, which is now, they got a petition with 200 people across Sonoma County calling on their elected officials to take the week without driving pledge to take the challenge. It is a rural community. couple of somewhat dense towns, a lot of suburban areas, but it's farm country, it's wine country. Um, and they got 200 people to sign saying, "Hey, I'm not going to take the pledge, but yeah, I'll sign the petition saying my politicians should take the pledge. Yeah, they should do it." Finding something that was easy for them to do. And 16 politicians or 15 politicians have taken that pledge. City council members, county supervisors have taken the pledge. And some of them, they're like, yeah, sure. How hard could this be? And they're having a very eye-opening week. And so to this point of like, when you feel alone, when you feel like you're the only one who cares, where no one else in your community cares, finding out what they care about, what the point of connection is. Maybe they don't want the big thing that you want, but they want something. And maybe that something is they want schmucks like you to be on the bus and not in the car in front of them. Or maybe it's they want other folks to, be able to like, yeah, we want our like this happens in like Aspen and like really fancy schmancy communities where they support bus service not because of the residents but for the workers type of thing. Like people, you don't. It's nice when people want it for the reasons that you want it. Politically speaking, you just need them to want it and say publicly that they want it. And so kind of recognizing that it's not about converting them to the Holy Church of Transit. It's about getting them to sign a petition or do a thing and making that thing a lot easier. And so, it was a big question. So it was a big answer. And I think also,
Yes, so I want to, it is 7:58 and we are going to take this to a close by
okay,
8. But that was really helpful in terms of thinking creatively in an environment that seems unwelcoming. What kind of creative things can you do? And there usually is something. So the book is really full of a lot of like very good insights, and Carter is available to talk to directly to help with those situations that are, real problems and make, folks justifiably mad, but there's usually something we can do about it. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Carter, for your leadership in writing this book. Um,
thank you.
Help bring other people on the path toward helping to change the world. There's some, maybe you haven't noticed, but some not great stuff going on in the broader world. But there's a lot of stuff we can do to make our home a little bit more safe and welcoming and affordable and caring. So thanks for joining us and, moving along the journey towards helping our world get a little bit better.
It's a great honor to be able to help people who want to make the world a better place have an easier time doing it. Because the good news is, you know, this is all just skills that people can learn and build. And at the end of the day, if you want to win, you got to fight. And how to fight is something that we can all learn how to do. And, to the kind of some of these earlier questions, there is no finish line. And so you get to do it as much as you feel like doing it. You get to make as much good in the world as you feel like doing. And you can take time off when you feel like not doing it or focusing on other stuff. And so
Yeah. And
great to help you.
there's no finish line to trying to make good change in the world, but there is a finish line to this event. So thank you
There we go.
for coming. Have a good evening and hope to see you later out and about.
Happy Transit Month, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.